I've been slowly making my way through the Trail series for a few years now, because it's fantastic. But I haven't really given the East series a fair shake despite the fact that it's the same legendary company behind both, Nihon Falcom. That is, until now. Hi, I'm Brandon, and I recently got the plague. Apparently, the key to getting into Ys was getting really sick. I couldn't do much, so when I was doing a little better one day, I picked up my Steam Deck to look for a game that my fever-addled brain could handle without making me feel even worse. I needed something a little lighter on reading with simpler mechanics, and that wouldn't require fast reactions. Yeah, I was not in good shape. Scrolling through my Steam library, I remembered that I had purchased Ys 1 and 2 Chronicles Plus on sale last year. I took a look at some screenshots, and it seemed like it just might fit the bill. They're both older games that are not massive time sinks, and I loved their aesthetic. So, on a whim, I booted up Ys 1. Before I share how that went, I want to say that this was actually my third go with the Ys series. I got Ys Origin from a Humble Bundle back in 2014, and I did try it, but after just a couple hours, I had serious carpal tunnel from mashing the attack button, and never picked it up again. Within the last couple years, I also tried Ys 8, but ended up drifting away from it, and I have yet to get back to it. Unsurprisingly, my expectations this time were not terribly high, but I was clearly interested in the series since I purchased Ys 1 and 2 Chronicles Plus last year. It wasn't part of a bundle. I made the conscious decision to spend money on it. I am so thankful that I did. Not only did it give me something to do while I was sick, I was having so much fun that the time flew by. Ys 1 relies on fairly simple but unique mechanics that aren't overwhelming, but also didn't put me to sleep. It was right in that sweet spot for me. It relies on what it calls the bump combat system, which is actually pretty spot on since you attack not by pressing a button, but by literally bumping into enemies. I found it to be immensely satisfying once I got used to it. After years of taking contact damage in games, finally, I got my revenge. I knew I was going to have to learn its combat system as I'd heard that it was a little different, but it really was refreshing for me. One other reason I loved Ys 1 so much is that it gave me context for the series' main protagonist, Adol Kristen, and the world as a whole. It's not like the Trails games where they give you mountains of text, and there's very little spoon feeding here. It gives enough information to keep you moving through the game, but it doesn't spell out every single little thing, and I loved it. I felt like I was allowed to spend time wondering and to make connections on my own. The world is fairly compact, but even with all of the backtracking I ended up doing, it felt good. Most areas are visually distinct enough that I could navigate through them without getting hopelessly lost. I did wish I had a map at times, but I played through the whole thing in 2 or 3 sessions, so most of it stayed fresh enough in my mind. The art style is a product of its time, and I will always have a special place in my heart for it. It's full of character and easily recognizable, and I would be happy to see it used in modern games. I think it's timeless. Did I mention it lets you save anywhere? Absolutely amazing. By the time I beat the final boss, I was feeling pretty great about my first complete Ys experience. And then it automatically booted up Ys 2, which I did not know was possible, but okay, no break, let's go. I normally like to take a breather after beating a game, and I especially don't go straight into a sequel. I don't want to risk burning myself out on something I enjoyed after all. This time though, I just shrugged and kept on chugging. Just like with the first game, I beat Ys 2 in 2 or 3 sessions, and by the time it was over, my appreciation for Ys had only grown. Ys 2 feels like the second half of Ys 1 in much the same way that Trails in the Sky's second chapter feels like the second half of the first Trails in the Sky game. If this comparison means nothing to you, what I mean to say is that it flows very smoothly from the first to the second. The combat system gets some tweaks and enhancements, making it even easier to get into a groove with, and before long, I was flying about the place, toppling enemies left and right and stacking up levels. It still uses the bump combat system, but it threw in enough changes to keep me on my toes. One of my personal favorites in JRPGs, when I was struggling with a boss, I had the option of just grinding to pad my stats and make it a little easier. I've never been that interested in memorizing every single attack pattern. I'd rather just over-prepare a little so that I can force my way through. I appreciate having that option. Across both games, you meet a lot of different characters, and as I started to see the connections between these characters and different parts of the world and its mythology, I could tell that these games are special. I'm glad I went out on a limb and bought the pack when it was on sale. Even at the full price of around $15, it would have been well worth it. But if you're on the fence, it frequently goes on sale for around $5. Again, you get 2 games for that. Hey, if you like what I'm doing here, I would humbly ask you to consider subscribing for more and giving the video a like to tell the world there's value here. Thanks for hearing me out. Now, back to Ys. By the time I finished Ys 2, I was totally hooked. I was also still extremely sick and wondering what else I could do to pass the time. And then I remembered. I have Ys Origin as well. Back to back, here we go. Ys Origin is exactly what it says in the title, an origin story. Instead of playing as Adol Kristen, Ys Origin lets you choose between a girl with an axe and a guy with a staff that shoots magic bolts reminiscent of what you might see in a shmup. The bump combat system is no more, and in its place stands a more traditional press-to-attack action combat system. I mentioned that I dropped Ys Origin before, right? I checked my save's timestamp to be sure, and yeah, it was from over 10 years ago. I remembered nothing. This was effectively a fresh experience for me. But I was able to go into it with one very important lesson lodged firmly in my brain. Avoid carpal tunnel at all costs. Thankfully, the Steam Deck lets you remap controls pretty easily, and it even lets you set a button to auto-fire. Instead of tapping a button 3 times to swing my weapon 3 times, this let me hold down the button to swing my weapon repeatedly until I released the button. Carpal tunnel? Solved. The combat might be pretty different from Ys 1 and 2, but once I got the hang of it, and with my auto-fire button setup, it was just as smooth. With a fresh cast of characters, I was a little worried that I would have a hard time getting invested in the story, but it took almost no time at all for me to start seeing connections to Ys 1 and 2, and that got me engaged fast. I recognize this word. Oh, this item is like that one thing. It kept happening throughout my time with Ys Origin, and I had a blast. I started out as the Axe Girl, and she had some real character development throughout. It reminded me of playing a Trails game in that respect. The characters show real growth. Once I'd beaten it with her, I immediately started up a playthrough as the guy with the staff, and again, major character growth and even more depth to the main story. Oh, you also unlock a third playable character after beating it once, so I did that one too to wrap things up. My second playthrough was made better by my first, and my third and final playthrough was made better by my first 2 playthroughs. I can't imagine recommending anything but the 3 full playthroughs. There's just so much here, and as an origin story, it helps answer so many of the questions I had after playing Ys 1 and 2. It was well worth the time I put into it. As a sort of public service announcement, I have to say this. The bumpers cycle through magic types on the fly. I thought I had to use the equipment menu to switch, and I didn't find out there was another way until I got stuck at the last boss. My eyes nearly popped out of my head when the guide video I watched showed them switching between magic types without using the menu. Maybe I missed the instructions somewhere, but wow, that could have made that first playthrough easier at times. Now you know. If you're ever feeling under the weather and want to play some Ys without making yourself feel worse, I would suggest playing Ys Origin on one of the easier difficulties like I did. It was a great companion while I was knocked on my bum. Oh, and again, I played on Steam Deck, so if you want to set a button to auto-fire like I did, I can at least say that the Steam version is a good way to go. Playing these 3 games was like traveling back to a time when games more often leaned on the short but sweet side, and I was into it. I don't always have to start from the beginning of a series, but I do prefer it when it's not unreasonable to do so. In this case, it looks like starting with Ys 1 was very much the right choice for me. I feel a connection to Adel and to the world of Ys, and I am excited to make time for more entries in the series here and there. I have no idea how much of a story connection there is in other Ys games, but I think I'm starting to get why people love Ys so much now. If you're Ys curious, maybe you'd find that starting from the beginning helps you too. If you've played Ys, how did you first get into it? If you haven't but want to, is there anything stopping you? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, go find some fun. Peace.